Hi, everyone. So I will introduce myself. My name is Albert Philip Berger, and I work for the Humanitarian Coordination Department at ICVA. Among my portfolio is the support to NGO fora worldwide, both national and international. And part of that job included working with some of the NGO fora that offer some coordination services. But perhaps to start setting a little bit the scene of where this document comes from, we have observed for a while that we could see some situations where the coordination services that were available on the field were not fully adapted. About 3 months ago, a colleague of mine who was running a consultancy to implement area-based management contacted me, and he told me that he was presenting a pretty basic model of, area HCTs, the way that they are now implemented in a few countries. However, the people he were talking to did not actually have experience with those mechanisms, and there was a lot of pushback. People were pushing back saying, look, the system cannot do this. This is not compatible with what we have. And so he was asking me for advice on how to approach this. And my answer was very clear. Within the ASC system, there are no standard terms of reference for subnational system. In practice, an HCT can decide what they want to set up in whatever way they see fit, depending on the situation. This makes total sense. We're talking about different contexts with different needs and different means. However, it also highlighted a bit of the reality that we can see today, a reality where the people are actually becoming more inflexible than the system, not necessarily willing to use some of the freedom that is there, that is embedded in the terms of reference, and make full use of it. And as the world is changing, this is becoming more and more of a problem. We actually need more flexibility, not less. Of particular interest are those cases where the system cannot deploy in the way it usually does, either in full, it can only deploy partially, or in some cases, not at all. For one thing, you have those situations, those contexts, where the political situation is a barrier to UN presence. But I can also mention all those cases where you have smaller areas of operations. And the reality is that coordination services have become considerably more expensive over the years as we've added a number of sectors, enough positions in order to provide those services in full. So clearly we need a solution to ensure we are able to fulfill our commitments to coordination, to provide an efficient response without gaps, no duplication in all settings. So we looked at 4 cases with which ICVA had been working for some years. And so we were aware of some of the work they were doing that went beyond what an NGO forum normally does. And so situations where they took the lead in coordinations, or they're providing some, or even in some cases, all of the services, and look a little bit at the comparative advantages and also at some of the challenges that they are facing. Now, I want to be clear, this is not a call to create an alternative to the existing system. Those examples, as far as we can tell, work rather well, but they are meant to be a model where the standard model cannot be deployed. They are meant to be options in specific cases. And there are a few caveats. Of particular importance is how those NGO-led systems link to the wider architecture. It is not enough for the services to be provided at the local level. The data must be available, the standards must be maintained, and there is a chain of accountability that must be implemented. It's also important to outline that coordination is a full-time job. It is not something that can be done during your spare time. You can't just have NGO personnel giving a little bit of their time here and there. It requires a specific skill set, and although, to be honest, those systems tend to be cheaper than the standardized ASC model, they still require to be adequately resourced. Our hope with this document is not, so as I said, for this model to become a standard. It's not meant to be that. It's meant to be something of an option to be used where and when it is needed. But we're hoping that the option will be considered more readily when it is the right solution, to see a bit less pushback on the fact that it might not be possible, because it is, and we're seeing it happening elsewhere. At the same time, through this document, we're hoping to make clear the set of requirements that are needed for NGO to lead on coordination mechanisms and ensure that they have the means to do so. I will stop here. It was a short introduction, and I'm happy to hand over to Garth Smith who has written this report. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Perfect. Many thanks, Alfie. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. I'm just going to start with a quick round of introductions. You know who's sitting in front of you. So I'm Garth Smith. So I was a consultant for ICVA on this report looking at adapting coordination. And prior to that, come from a former head of the Syria NGO Forum and worked with NGO forums across the world. Passing over.
Hi, everyone. Alex Hilliard. I'm with the Danish Refugee Council. I'm the Humanitarian Policy Coordinator. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ahmed Mohammed. I work with Save Somali Women and Children based in Mogadishu, Somalia. I've in the past also sat at the HCT, and there is quite that we're going to discuss today, inshallah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheetal Rana. I work for an Irish NGO called Trukra, and within Trukra, I am in a partnership and localization hub, and very happy and honored to be here.
Excellent. So thanks very much, and to those attending as well. I do have a tendency to get quite excited and speak fairly quickly about coordination. So if that happens at any point, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll take it as a sign to slow down. As Alfie mentioned, we're launching a report today, which has been the product of work over the past year or so, looking at how to adapt coordination, particularly in complex and constrained environments. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes or so just running through some of the core findings and examples and where we may need to take this in the future. And then we'll hear from a few colleagues who have operational and global coordination experience on their views as well. To start with, I'm just going to set the scene a little bit, though, and take us back a little bit. And I'm going to have to take us down, I think, in tone a little bit to hopefully then bring us back up in terms of positivity. For those of you who have sat through a few of these talks around AidEx today and yesterday, and over the past couple of weeks, some of the big global meetings, I think you probably will have heard a fairly similar message. We're probably at a pivot point in terms of where the humanitarian system is right now. Tom Fletcher, the incoming ERC, I think borrowed words from the Secretary General and talked about an inflection point last week. And I think that's fair. The message is pretty well healed at this point. We've got increasing humanitarian crises, and we've got increasingly complex humanitarian crises. The numbers are there, 300 million in need of assistance, doubling of displacement, climate, health crises, etc. But I think it's fair to see the kind of common trajectory that we are either in or probably entering a state of permacrisis or polycrisis. We have crises which are occurring, they're concurring, they're recurring, often in the same geographic locations with regionalized issues and stacking on top of one another. You add all that with financing for humanitarian response declining, both in real terms now and also very much more so relative to need. And then on top of that, we have the increasing attacks on international norms. We see multilateralism under threat, which has been a friend of the humanitarian international system for many years, but increasing attacks on norms, on international humanitarian law. Access is increasingly instrumentalized or more overtly attacked, and it's becoming a lot harder to provide aid in complex settings. I think what we're seeing in many of the recent crises is both people and supplies and financing increasingly difficult to get across borders or within countries and attacked and instrumentalized. So that's the negative side of things, and we're facing an increasingly challenging situation. And I think if you look back, even just a short walk through the crises that we're dealing with globally right now, I think that pretty much sums up the challenges of the world that we're facing. So Lebanon, Gaza, Turkey, Syria earthquakes, Sudan, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, going even a couple of years back. And that's not even talking about Haiti, Burkina Faso, Democratic Republic of the Congo, which struggle to even get attention within humanitarian circles. All of these, we're facing increasing challenges with a lot harder access issues. So that brings us back to humanitarian coordination. And why are we looking at adaptive models for coordination? So as these challenges have worsened, we have positively seen an increasing professionalization and increasing focus on humanitarian coordination over the past 20 years. even the creation of the IASC, of OCHA, and the iterative development of the cluster system, huge benefits in terms of reducing duplication, increasing standards, improving the way that we collectively act on humanitarian issues. But within that challenged world, we're increasingly seeing complexity around what is risking becoming an overly centralized, overly bureaucratized, and less flexible coordination system at times. The professionalization has been a success, but also has created challenges in terms of adapting coordination and focusing on getting aid to people who need it and enabling their access. You only have to look, as Alfie mentioned, at some of the conversations on area-based coordination, on the HRP processes, and the level of effort and complexity that is involved within those, and the level of investment that requires. And that's where we're turning to more adapted coordination models in certain circumstances. So as part of this research, we looked at what is existing and what has cropped up recently. 4 good case studies have come through. So Sudan, you will have heard in a number of conversations and over the past year, emergency response rooms, self-organized groups formed off the back of youth movements, cropping up and both providing and coordinating assistance within areas and between differing emergency response rooms in Sudan, partly as a response to the vacuum of international actors on the ground. We have also nascent conversations on cross-border access and NGO-coordinated cross-border assistance in Sudan, although obviously more work to be done. In Syria, some of the early cross-border work, a product of trusted relationships and networks developing between international actors and Syrian organizations managing to keep assistance going in very challenging circumstances. We've also had the Northeast Syria Forum, so in response to the loss of the UN Security Council cross-border authorization for UN access from Iraq into Northeast Syria. The Northeast Syria Forum, a network of NGOs taking on more operational coordination roles in response to the inability of the United Nations in a part of Syria to lead operational coordination and access. In Myanmar, we have a long history of civil society, self-organized coordination of development and humanitarian assistance. And again, increasing international and national networks, coordinating both cross-border and in difficult access areas inside Myanmar. In Nigeria, in areas of the country which have fallen traditionally outside of the humanitarian response plan on a formal level, we've seen NGO networks leading at times with the UN coordination mechanisms focused on both humanitarian and linking humanitarian and development work. And these aren't alone. Ukraine, the early days in terms of self-organized Ukrainian civil society in neighboring countries coming together to coordinate assistance, and multiple other examples of NGO-led coordination models cropping up. They're also not new, right? We've been coordinating assistance at community level amongst civil society since before the cluster system, and we will continue to do so for many years to come. But I think the critical point that we're seeing is that with an increasingly complex world and increasingly challenging access issues, the opportunities of focusing on more adaptive models are particularly key. So why are we focusing on them? What can they bring? I think first and foremost, what we're seeing is that they are often context-specific and adapted to a context. So again, the cases in Syria, in Sudan, we've had models which have been created, not coming from a sort of top-down, how does the IASC system look and how do we implement it, but adapting around a gap and a need. So the nuances of needing to do cross-border work or operate in an area where the international community has limited presence. And that means that the functions and the ways of operating have been contextualized to those contexts. Second, they're more inclusive of local actors by their nature. And again, we don't have to go far through the recent literature on coordination to see the challenges of communities, national, international actors engaging with traditional coordination structures. And that's true at both country and global levels. And there's huge amounts of positive work on that, but still a major challenge. Adapted coordination and localized coordination models are by their nature more inclusive of those who are within communities and supporting communities on the ground, and that can be a benefit. And third, they can operate more discreetly. And again, with increasing access challenges, what we're seeing is the benefits of having low profile and more agile coordination in areas where cross-border access is restricted and where there is potential instrumentalization of aid. Cross-border in Sudan and Syria, for example, the ability to work under the radar and without the risk of leverage of what an internationally led system brings can be very, very powerful. It either affords an ability to operate low profile or to have plausible deniability around alternative mechanisms for getting aid to those who need it. So a few of the key benefits. I think what we also looked at was some of the lessons around sort of these models. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of those and then maybe where we can take this next. I think first and foremost, to reiterate Alfie's points that this is not an either or. In all of the contexts we looked at, we're not seeing a call, and I think it's risky to say that we need to throw out the UN system or get rid of the clusters. They exist for a reason and do a very, very valid job. But the power of where these networks and coordination models are being effective is by embracing a systems approach. So having the power and the comparative advantages of the IASC at global levels, of a humanitarian country team, of localized coordination structures, and utilizing the benefits operationally and from advocacy perspectives that they bring as a system. We need to embrace that agility, and that enables quicker decision-making often in responses. And again, the layers of a heavily centralized coordination architecture can limit the speed of decision-making, often in acute crises particularly. We also are seeing that trust is essential here. And I think, again, we look back to the start of the Syria crisis, we look at the Sudan response, we look at some of the recent very difficult responses where alternative and adapted mechanisms have worked. They've been built on trust. Trust within those networks, trust between localized coordination or NGO coordination and the international system. That requires investment, it requires focus on, but it's critical to getting a complex coordination right. And I think the final sort of point and sort of lesson we've learned is that accountability can be strengthened. So Alfie touched on this, and one of the common fears we sometimes hear of a more decentralized coordination is that it lacks accountability. But what often we're talking about there is vertical accountability. So it's accountability to a humanitarian coordinator, to the emergency directors group, to the interagency standing committee. And that's super critical. But what it misses is that localized coordination structures obviously come with a stronger social contract with the communities they work for. The accountability to those being served is stronger. The consequences for a coordination structure of getting it wrong are a lot higher for those working within and part of a community. So this is not to say these are models are not without risk. There is a huge reason, as I said, that the IASC exists and that we have coordination structures that have come together. The risk of overcomplicating, of seeing competition, of seeing proliferation of networks is very, very strong. But if we embrace that complexity, that systems approaches, the power that it can bring of multiple modalities is key. So I'll just conclude with a couple of points of where we potentially need to go in the future if we're to go some way to strengthening coordination. I think first, embracing that systems approach, as I say, and that's true at both a country level as we're looking at scaling up international response to humanitarian systems, looking at what exists already on the ground, building our coordination structures around it, being agile in those conversations in Geneva, in New York, at the start of a major crisis, thinking creatively around how the coordination system works. Linked to that, putting people back at the heart of humanitarian coordination and people-centered access. And again, I think too often, because of the world that the international system works in, we come from a perspective of how do we get international coordination structures on the ground? How do we enable international access? Flipping that conversation is critical. How is it that people can access aid? Is it that there are already networks working that can be supported? Is it that cross-border without a Security Council resolution is critical? What are the other modalities that are there? And then third, to come back to where Alfie started, we need to invest in leadership and coordination at all levels. We're going to hear many times around the hall that investment in local response capacities is severely lacking and continues to be underfunded. Investment in local coordination capacities and NGO coordination is even less funded than that. And again, it's an enabling system. It's not the front line of delivery, but we need to invest more in professionalizing support, in funding for coordination mechanisms at the local level. As a former INGO staff member, we have spare budget for investing in people spending their time on coordination. Most of our national NGO partners and networks don't have that luxury. So investment and prioritization is key. There's a lot more learning to do on this. There's a lot more thinking to do as well. So hopefully this is also the start of a conversation. But I'll kind of leave it there on some of the core findings. I'm going to hear a little bit from our panelists, and again, at both sort of global and operational levels, their views on how we take coordination forward. And then we'll have a chance for a few Q&A at the end. So turning over to Ahmed Mohammed first. Ahmed, you have experience from across Somalia and across the region. Be interested in sort of your views on how is it that we can make humanitarian coordination work best in service of those who need it.
Thank you, Gar. Thank you, Gar. I think let me first give a background on why we should be discussing this. It seems the systems that currently existing is not sufficient and is not supporting the work we do in different contexts. Basically, I believe that is as a result of using the same approach in solving different context issues. I think that one of the challenges that we have. If you look at the context that this report is looking at, they are unique in nature, and the others that are not part of this report, but at the same time have similar issues. We cannot have a stable country and a complex conflict affected country to have same coordination mechanisms. I personally sat at the HCT, and we don't speak with the ground totally. We are not yet known at the ground and what's happening basically at the grassroots level. Apart from those challenges, let's also look at coordination. Coordination, I think, is not something that we should say that it's a part-time job. Of course, it's a full-time job that needs resources and time, and also the skills to ensure that it provides the results, the desired results, actually. And for that to happen, I think, of course, we're supposed to be contributing at individual level from different organizations. We can partly contribute to, but at least there should be some form of full-time responsibility at one stage. So from adapting the coordination through the NGOs in this complex environment that we're talking about, I think the inclusion of local actors plays a key role, because if you look at the coordination activities that happen, or those who report on those activities within the grassroots, 80%, I think, are local NGOs, which either provide the information or the data or coordinate at some point, because the system that exists currently does not go beyond a certain level. So going down to the grassroots, I think it's important that we include the local actors. Similar case, which also causes challenges, is some of these complex environments, access is an issue. The local, authorities don't even have access in some places. So when the local authorities don't have access in some of those areas, and still we need to be providing services, I think we will fail to honor the principles or the humanitarian principles in those specific locations. since we don't know what's happening, and anybody who provides service there or support beneficiaries will not have adequate, way of providing the data to the centralized coordination systems. So it's important that we involve local actors at some level, and even where there are no local administrations, at least we should look at ways of improving or utilizing those in charge of those particular locations, so that we have adequate information so that we can make a decision. Many times, the challenge we have with coordination is that we are unable to do coordination based on its purpose, because the purpose of coordination is to utilize the limited resources, is to bring information on the table so that we make decisions. But most of the times, coordination is done based on ticking a particular box, so that we are doing ABCD. So it has become more of a systemized than achieving the original objective, which we tend to achieve. Another important aspect is invest in the local actors, where local staff, let's say, whether they are working for their NGOs or national NGOs, as long as they're involved in coordination at grassroots level, they should have the necessary skills to manage this, coordination mechanisms, whether it is understanding the tools that we're using, whether it is creating a very efficient way of reporting the coordination activities that happen on the ground. At least having the necessary skills on the ground is very key, and that will help us in the long run. It's also important we simplify the coordination systems that exist. Currently, it's so complex that it's just a one way. Everything goes one way. So it's important we adapt different settings, skills, or unique avenues that are available, whether it's in Nigeria, in Syria, or Palestine. At least having those simplified systems of reporting, the tools, the issue of 5W matrix, and so forth, and so many things that are there, at least need to be less complex, so that the objective of coordination is achieved. It's also important to invest in terms of resources. Most of the times, whether it's local NGO or national NGO, there are no resources that are allocated for coordination. And if at all it's there, it's very limited. It's not going beyond a certain percentage that will have given us the desired results. So investing, probably having some funds that are dedicated for coordination will tell us that that is a very critical aspect that we need to honor, and also give us a way that we can adopt the NGO coordination in those complex environments. Use of technology is also very important. Nowadays, I don't think somebody should be physically there to provide information or provide data. As long as those who are implementing activities on the ground have the data, they can share online. We have monthly and weekly meetings online, and more of these days, there is the AI, which takes the minute and gives you the report in a very short period. I think that is very important. And lastly, but not the least, also is investing in structures, because at the moment the structures we have go up to a certain level, from the national level to reach a certain level that it cannot go beyond. So we need to have a permanent structures that exist, providing the necessary support, and also ensuring that the partners implementing activities in different parts of those localities are enabled to provide the data to those particular structures that has been established. And this is a kind of permanent structure, not those are just temporarily established and go away within a short period of time. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ahmed. And a lot of those points really resonate. And I think I'll share a small anecdote, and I won't mention the response, but a response I worked on a few years ago. I was having conversations with a national NGO network about the humanitarian country team. And they said, look, we turn up to the humanitarian country team because it's the polite thing to do, but then we go away and we coordinate and sort out our response afterwards. And I think that should be a red flag, right? When we're at a point where we're overcomplicating for the sake of it, rather than adapting to, as you say, simplify those coordination structures, make them linked to what exists and the capacities and approaches that already exist, I think is super critical. Thanks so much. Alex, DRC has been obviously a huge operational actor, but also been very involved in the coordination world, both globally and at response levels. Yeah, well, a few thoughts from yourself on how we can improve and strengthen humanitarian coordination in the future.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Garth, and thank you, Mohammed. I'm going to bring the international NGO perspective. So I'm with the Danish Refugee Council. We're operational in around 40 countries around the world. So just to look a little bit at the current system, what we call the traditional system, interagency standing committee mandated system. So it's almost 20 years old. It was set up in 2005, the cluster system as we know it. And it's still very effective in some contexts. But as a system-wide standard approach, I think we're coming to a point where most of us agree that it's maybe not the right model. Maybe it's had its day, and maybe needs to be forced to adapt to a new and in some cases not so new reality. So there are big advantages. Cluster coordinators, they bring a wealth of technical expertise and experience and coordination experience. And OCHA is in some cases working very effectively for the response and for the benefit of everyone involved in the response. So these are elements, to hold on to and take forward into perhaps a new model. Humanitarian coordinators, HCs, are heading up their responses. They are in an impossible job in many cases. I wouldn't envy the position. They are trying to please everyone. They're trying to please governments and keep the humanitarian community happy, as well as where possible engaging with de facto authorities. It's a very difficult role. Some are doing a great job, as we know as I experienced myself when I was in Yemen, but also through multiple conversations with the DRC country directors. Some are doing a great job. The NGO community is very happy. Others are maybe less successful, and that can be for a variety of reasons. It's often because they don't have a sufficiently humanitarian background to be the sort of voice of the humanitarian community across the spectrum, from international to local NGOs to civil society and communities. Humanitarian country teams, again, just going through the sort of three main structures of the Interagency Standing Committee system. Most senior leadership body in country. Similarly, in some cases, we've got great HCTs. They're working very effectively for the good of the response. Everyone is very happy. The coordination through the HCT is working very well. But there are quite a high number of contexts where that is not the case, and where certainly the NGOs feel that the UN agenda is being imposed upon them, and they don't really see a way for that to change. And I think those are often the contexts where we see more and more these sort of more informal NGO-led, non-UN-led mechanisms springing up. So that's the traditional system that we have that's still in operation. So as to blending the traditional with the sort of emerging alternative sort of system that Garth has talked about, it's difficult. We have a very sort of established formal bureaucratic system which has had a lot invested in it over the last 19 years, and sort of blending or merging that with the more informal, organic often grassroots and very, very contextually specific approaches that Garth has outlined is not an easy task. So I think, I mean, two questions that I'm often mentioning, I don't have answers to them, unfortunately. If anyone does, that would be great. So first of all, what are some of the barriers to doing this? You know, why hasn't this already happened? I think is important to investigate. And I think another one, which, you know, can get a bit sensitive, is who is actually still benefiting from the status quo. 2 decades after it was set up. And I think these are some hard questions that really, yeah, need to be looked into in a quite transparent way. I think just also looking at OCHA and looking at some opportunities, you know, OCHA with their flagship initiative have demonstrated that they really recognize the importance of starting with communities and starting with community engagement, and which is great. What is not so clear is how how the system will be adapted to include or to be led by that community engagement. That remains to be seen, but I think that could serve as an important model. And I think it'll be interesting to see with the new emergency relief coordinator when he starts in a few weeks or a couple of months, to see how he takes that on and what what form that takes. And we're very interested in trying to influence that process. A practical way forward also, and I think this is something that certainly from the international NGO side is quite popular, is the idea of OCHA retaining its role as sort of technical advisory body through the clusters, but letting in some context, and again, it has to be contextually specific, and autonomy has to be given to NGOs, local actors, where possible. But to let the coordination where it needs to be actually led not by the UN, not by the HCT and by OCHA, but by NGOs, be they international or local or national. So I think, yeah, that's quite key for us, is that OCHA retaining that sort of, or having that technical advisory role in order to move forward, to blend the two. There is certainly, I mean, as Garth said, now is a sort of pivotal moment. I mean, people have been saying this, I think, for a couple of years, and it's, nothing is changing. But with conversations like these, we hope that something slowly moves forward. I mean, I think a few years ago there just wasn't maybe the type of momentum that there is now, and I think this is definitely a bit of a result of the grand bargain. It's definitely a bit of a result of the emphasis on localization. Definitely a lot to do with these very complex contexts, a lot of politically estranged states, contested zones, particularly where the UN can't operate easily or at all. We see a lot of interest from donors in coordination modalities. We're often asked about this and to elaborate on this in proposals. And we're sort of asked to show that rather than, they don't want to see that we're proving that we're plugged into a system that's maybe not working effectively. That's not the point. The point is to show that we are coordinating in a way that is effective and, let's be very honest, cost efficient, whatever form that might take. I think also UN agencies may be more at the technical level, but there's definitely an appetite there. They see that there is great benefit in NGO-led coordination. And I think moving away from, I think for them it's also beneficial sometimes to move away from this mandated focus and look at, whether it's ground level or subnational, and look at who the strongest actors are, who's the quickest, who's the most agile, the most flexible. So yeah, and as I mentioned, we really hope that the new ERC, Tom Fletcher, will be open to leading some of these shifts in the system. And we would like to see leadership from him to sort of to demonstrate to those who are maybe a little bit resistant that this is not a threat to the existing order, but rather it's a great opportunity to be more effective and probably, I think, more principled, which should ultimately be the aim of everyone. So for now, DRC's view or thoughts on this, on alternative coordination. So as I've said, I think continuing where necessary, allowing there to be these organic, NGO-led, non-UN-led mechanisms where appropriate, but with this working alongside the existing architecture, the cluster system, etc. And DRC, like other international NGOs, can, where possible, sort of help to bridge a gap, especially when there's, maybe not the technical coordination experience at ground level. And so I think also we're aiming for some formal recognition. I'm not sure if any of us here can actually see what that would look like practically, but a formal recognition that this is extremely effective and it's happening in many contexts around the world, but without losing, so we want this to be recognized by the system and somehow incorporated, but without losing any of the kind of flexibility and agility that it brings to the response. So yeah, I think as Garth said, it's about putting people back at the heart of coordination, and it's about what is best for communities and providing the best, quickest, most effective response. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Alex. And a couple of points really resonated there. I think this is not a new conversation either. I had the slightly thankless task of going back through operational peer reviews and evaluations back to pre the cluster system. And you will see a trajectory throughout there that this is a theme that's run throughout. But I think your point is key around there being some momentum right now, some winds of change and something to capitalize on. And that's come from a product of multiple different avenues, but I think there is an approach there. Okay, perfect. So turning finally to Sheetal. So Sheetal, Troycare has been obviously a force for effective partnerships and a strong advocate for localization and support to those closest to communities over the years. What's your views? How do we strengthen coordination? What more can we do as an international and national community?
Thank you, Garth. So let me begin with connecting this report's finding to last week's Grand Bargain meeting, annual meeting where signatories came together to discuss our progress on the Grand Bargain commitments and also to discuss on the implementation agenda through 2026, which is when the Grand Bargain is scheduled to end. So one of the agenda items is the following. OCHA supports the equitable and meaningful participation of local and national actors, including women-led organizations and HCTs, CCCGs, CBPF, advisory group, and cluster lead agencies that ensure that local and national actors' co-leadership of clusters is preferred arrangements unless inappropriate or unfeasible. Bunch of acronyms there, but the emphasis is equitable and meaningful partnerships, co-leadership. Yeah. So the report comes timely as it focuses on critical issues of local leadership in humanitarian contexts, more specifically in adapting NGO coordination in complex and estranged settings, right? So before diving into that, I would like to take a little bit of time to reflect on local leadership in coordination mechanisms. And as you were saying, what I'm going to be sharing is nothing new. It's been written extensively, it's been discussed, but it's still important to highlight, yeah? Local leadership in coordination mechanisms, strategic coordination and decision-making mechanisms. And in doing so, I will also draw on Troycare's own experience of working with partners and supporting local leadership, yeah? So as many of us already know, barriers to participation of local leaders in humanitarian structures, irrespective of the context, still continues, right? Coordination mechanisms, which are meant to streamline the response, at times tends to reinforce unequitable power relationships that marginalize local actors who are closer to the grounds, have deeper understanding of the context and the needs of the communities. So within these local actors, women-led organizations tend to be further marginalized. Yeah. And some of our partners tell us that it's not just about participation and leadership, it's also about access. We're talking about internet, making it technical, but technical access in terms of resources for the staff time to participate in the coordination structures, access in terms of travel cost, the cost of part and other related costs. So these are some of the issues that local actors, or the challenges that the local actors face. And I do not want to focus on the challenges only, but also highlight some of the work that TROCRA and other local intermediaries are doing to facilitate local leadership, facilitate the participation of local and national actors in these coordination mechanisms. One of the key approaches that would support is flexible funding that includes core cost and indirect cost that allows partners to allocate resources to participate in these cluster mechanisms. Mentoring, need-based mentoring support to participate and lead in coordination spaces. And then at times, where feasible, seeding our own space so local actors can take on that leadership roles. Yeah. So now moving to the second part, adapting humanitarian coordination mechanisms in high-risk context areas. These are situations where our partners who have deep connections to and social capital to the communities affected, who are, as part of the communities, also in crisis and responding to crisis. How do we as international actors from the margins support our local and national actors to lead the coordination mechanisms? Yeah, I think these are things for us to reflect on. As mentioned in the report, flexibility is key. Yeah, flexibility might be needed in terms of due diligence, compliance requirements, where we may need to look into non-standard procedures, activating non-standard procedures, adopting flexible program approaches, and covering the cost of coordination. As we've discussed, coordination is not free, right? It does cost money and resources to lead or participate in coordination mechanisms. Risk sharing becomes important, not just in terms of programmatic perspective, but also in terms of safety and security of the program staff, our partner staff, right? It is essential for us as international actors sitting on the margins to have meaningful conversations with our local and national actors on how we can meaningfully support the safety and security of our local and national partners. This could mean supporting with contingency planning, supporting with funding the contingency planning and other related areas. Our partners have shared their experiences, the challenges they face in leading the coordination, leading the responses in contexts like that. Yeah, offices being raided, staff having to relocate with their families, activation of conscription law that may risk our partner staff having to serve in a military that they do not support. Yeah, organizations being blacklisted. Access is not simple for local and national actors either, right? And I was listening to one of the panel conversation yesterday, and Nadine Sabah from Lebanon was saying that for local actors, they do not step in when there is crisis. They're already there, right? So as duty of care becomes really important, and as international actors, I think we have a lot of, we need to look into how we meaningfully support in these different structures, coordination structures, so that partners are able to lead the work more effectively. So in closing, I would like to thank ICVA and Garth for this insight and the timeliness of the report. It shines light on the need for continued support to promote local leadership and encourages us all to reflect on how we can contribute to more equitable, inclusive, and effective coordination mechanism. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sheetal. And I think there's a really key point actually there around the support and the duty of care and the shared services support as well for particularly for national and local coordination structures. And this is something that actually has come through, but we look at the coordinated shared services which exist within the humanitarian sector, the humanitarian air service, pipelines of supplies, support on safety and security. So much of it is tied to the international system. It's not tied to supporting localized coordination systems. And I think it all forms part of that puzzle of how do we, as an international community, better support the coordination capacities and response capacities that are existing on the ground. Okay, you've listened to us for long enough. Thanks for those who've joined. We wanted to leave a few minutes for questions, comments, thoughts, and we'll then wrap up after that. If anyone's brave enough to volunteer.
Here we go.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the discussion. I think, as you said, this is not a new topic, but I think we still, that elusive answer of the balance between, you mentioned blended, you know, like how do you manage that blended architecture? Do you have any particular feedback on those who are saying that a lot of this area-based coordination, the biggest problem is the risk of further fragmentation and duplication, especially in very complex crises? Like, do you have anything to argue against that? Thank you.
Do we want to see if there's another question or carry on?
Okay, I can start, and then if anyone else, I'm looking at eyes, I'm seeing shakings of heads as well. No, I think it's a really critical point, and that risk of division, I think, is real. We've seen it in several humanitarian crises of competition between NGOs, international and national, and the UN system, of divergent coordination models. I think for me, from both operational experience as a coordinator and from some of the research we did, part of it comes back to trust, and the trust of the conversations, particularly with senior leaders in the response. And by that, I mean, it's your humanitarian coordinators, it's your NGO forum directors, it's your country directors, it's your national directors and national networks. And where we've seen this effective is, it kind of links back to the past session, but that humanitarian diplomacy, the small trusted conversations in rooms between different types of actors around the comparative collective advantage of bringing together a system. And there's no easy way, right? I think, Alex, you know, what you were saying made me reflect. It's easy to say that it's all complex and, you know, it's all chaos. But yeah, the power of those conversations and strategically thinking through what each element of it can bring as a collective, I think, is super critical. I think the resistance to thinking creatively is a threat. And again, we've seen this in responses, Syria, with the loss of the cross-border council resolution. There was a lot of resistance in some circles to thinking about alternative ways of providing aid, because that's what the system does. It exists and it needs to fulfill a function. So again, it requires us training humanitarian coordinators and selecting them from the right places. It requires those trusted conversations. So I think sort of embracing a mindset and, you know, harnessing those winds of change, I think is key for me. And being honest about the risks, I think. You know, one of the conversations we had within this research was, look, we're not saying this is a silver bullet. We're not saying let's give coordination to NGOs and let them run the world, because that's not going to work. But yeah, being honest about those risks and discussing them openly, I think. Yeah. Ahmed or Alex, do you want to go?
Maybe just one extra thought. I think on area-based coordination particularly, there is emerging evidence providing everyone with a slightly more, what's the word, standardized idea or understanding of what it is, because I think that varies hugely. And I think the more that this is understood, the less, you know, the more I think people across the system, and I'm including UN agencies, because I know that some, for example, are very, like IOM, for example, is quite keen on area-based coordination. I think the more that people will be willing to let it happen, because they see that it's been really successful. And, you know, it's a classic, when there's evidence of success, people let it happen. Of course, as Gar said, I think the allowance for risk is really, really crucial. But I think, as I've said already, I think the appetite is there, even also from the donor side.
I want to ask my friend here a question. Are we okay now? The way we are we okay? And that's why we are discussing this subject. Already there is duplication that's taking place. There is omission, and there are many challenges. That's why this report is here and this discussion is here. And when we are talking about how can we do the area-based coordination and have it a locally led way, it doesn't mean that we are overlooking the risks that are there. Already, we talked about how to overcome some of these risks, like investing in terms of finance, investing in terms of technical capacities, tools, to ensure that the system operates in a manner that will not have duplication and make it more effective and efficient than it was before. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ahmed. And actually, just sort of final points on that. I think one of the challenges we've also seen, if we look back at some of the past recent responses, which are complex, is the getting coordination wrong at the start or bad has led us to spend years at times trying to refix the system. Yemen, Syria, there's a few other examples of incredibly positive work on how the humanitarian architecture has helped coordinate, but also challenges and mistakes we've made early on in the way we structured things that we then had to fix collectively, right? Not just NGOs or UN or anyone else. So which again, I think goes back to that point of those early strategic conversations on, day 1, not even day 15 of where are we going? How do we best work within a context? I think there's one other question.
Thank you. I work for GISF, so the NGO Safety and Security Network. This is all very interesting for me. I know that NGO security staff quite like having their own little shadow networks, which have no structure, so they'll be keen on this. I haven't had a chance to read the report, but I'm curious from my own experience of what were donors consulted, because I know that the issue with donors is that they quite like to know what they're getting when they put the money in. They're very safe, conservative. Well, those structures exist. I know how it works. What is the donor appetite for this kind of approach, and what needs to be done to shift their mindset?
Okay, I'll start on that one, and then we can. Is this related to the same point, or do you want to? Okay.
Well, thank you. I'm Mohammed from Kenya, and I'm representing a local government hosting the largest refugee, Dadaab, in Kenya. I am doing the coordination aspect for my county. And one of the challenges maybe I want to even hear is that at that level, the county levels or the local government level, one of the challenges we are getting is that there is a lack of a framework, a policy to coordinate organizations. So for example, if you don't have a framework or a policy to coordinate those organizations, it becomes very difficult. And that is the entry point where we miss. So for us to go and do a proper coordination, whether a country is in a crisis stage or whether the country is unstable, the coordinating that is the local government and the national government must have a framework for coordination where you can tell this organization, this is the entry point and this is how we do things. So I think for us to do the best things in coordination globally, we need to support local government, we need to support national government in developing of structures and also strengthening the issue on policy for coordination, because more people are concentrating more on humanitarian response on emergency, but they forget to support the coordination aspect, which will going to solve the issue on duplication, the issue on trust, the issue on organization working together and complementing. So the issue on the most important thing is coming up with a framework at a global level in terms of coordination at the national level and then the local level. That one will going to streamline. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks both. I'll take those one by one and also then look at sure, I'll take the third one and then I'll try and remember it.
Thank you for the speech. Reflecting on adaptive models such as the emergency response rooms in Sudan or cross-border coordination in Syria, what lessons can we take forward to improve coordination in future crises?
Perfect. All right. I didn't have a pen on me, but I'll try and remember those. So I think starting with donors and appetite, I think it's a really important question. We have spoken to some donors on this at country levels and global levels. I'd say there's two trends potentially. One is again, a moment of kind of reflection from donors around the way that we are coordinating across the humanitarian architecture globally. I don't get a sense, and others correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't get a sense that is always with a clear direction yet, but it's a space to be shaped. A lot of thinking, you know, I won't mention names on the conversations, but a lot of thinking around where can we adapt and improve the coordination architecture. And I think looking for guidance to some degree. And I was trying to see if there's any donors in the panel, but yeah, so I think it's an opportunity to shape their thinking on that as well and show what works. I think that's key. At national levels, I think we've actually seen a positive financing of country-level coordination systems from donors in a lot of these contexts. So again, Syria, good example. A lot of funding of NGO forums over the years. A lot of challenges in funding NGO forums as well. The challenge I think we see is, as you say, donors ask kind of, what are we getting out of this? What's the benefit? And so I think making the case and demonstrating the operational impact of alternative approaches on the ground, I think is super, super critical. And we're not always great at doing that. But I don't know, I see appetite when there's when it's kind of shaped. Local government coordination, I think, super key as well. I didn't touch on it much in sort of what I shared, but it did form part of the conversations that we had. And I think it's within the same problem set, right? An international system, because it is internationalized, doesn't always have the links with the nuances of local government, regional government, national governments. And the benefits of using adapted coordination models that are driven a little bit more from the ground up is that they are linked in with those systems. They can support in a mutual aid way, or work in complement, or working areas where there is no local or national government. But I think it's a critical part of getting that right. And then lessons, yeah, I think again, sort of harking back to some of the sort of key points, and I'll touch on this at the end, but that agility, I think, embracing different ways of working, learning from other contexts. I think we've just seen a benefit in actually bringing together the different types of NGO-led mechanisms across the world, sharing information on what they're doing. I think have been super key. Looking to panelists, any key thoughts on any of those three questions? Oh, sorry, I'm at Alfie. I can see. I'll let Alfie come in.
If you don't mind, sorry, I know you cannot see me on the screen. A couple of remarks on those questions. On the donors one, look, I'm not going to talk about what the donors think globally because I haven't had that conversation. But if you look at the structure as they exist, I'm thinking especially about Syria, it's actually fairly well funded. It hasn't been difficult to find donors that are willing to fund the structure as it exists. I'm not saying it's true everywhere, but at least for that one, it's been easy. However, I think the question is not just about the funding, it's also about why exactly is it being funded and to what extent. So the two issues I see is, first of all, why are you funding it? I do believe that to some extent, having an NGO forum run coordination is very advantageous to donors because there's a lot more transparency simply in the way the contracts are written, and there's a much better access to data. I mean, that's a plus, but at the same time, is this how we want to run coordination systems? And it's a real question on whether we want to have the usual NGO contracts that we have when we're running those systems compared to the type of funding stream and the independence that OCHA would have. So, I mean, there are some pluses and minuses there. Secondly, there is also, I mean, while I'm telling you that funding has not been difficult to get, it's also we've been able to get it, but for services that are shared. What I mean here is that most of the personnel that is working on the sectorial coordination in Northeast Syria is not dedicated. And this is becoming a bit of a problem. We're feeling a little bit that this is coordination that's being run on the cheap. In my intro, I mentioned about the need to resource fora. This is absolutely a good example of this. It is extremely difficult to run coordination without dedicated personnel. And we cannot be in a situation where all of a sudden the NGOs become the cheap solution to do the work by sharing their time with their operations. That's not how it can work. So there's definitely a discussion here to be had about what are the actual resources that are needed when NGOs do it. And it will probably turn up that it's not that much cheaper than when the system does it. And that's not necessarily the point. It's about a comparative advantage in terms of agility, but not necessarily in terms of cost. But I think these discussions still need to happen. A remark also on the link with authorities. So a quick reminder, it's actually absolutely in the terms of reference of all ASC structures to link with the authorities and coordinate with them, whether it's at national or at subnational level. I think it's really important that we agree on this. When NGOs run coordination, they have to be held to the same standards. We have to separate form and function. The form might be different. The function has to be the same. It has to be able to fulfill the same responsibilities, and that includes coordinating positively with the authorities, especially in those places where the authorities are actually capable and willing to provide sectorial services. This is not something where NGOs are necessarily always the best position to do this. There's some work to be done, some sensitization to be done within the fora themselves, but certainly there's an expectation for a different type of engagement. On the very last question on what can be done to how can we improve, I echo what Garth just said on agility, but I will say specifically the ability to review your system, and that is really where we've hit a wall. It's normal when there's an onset emergency that you decide quickly on what it is you're going to be setting up, that you don't have enough time to think about all the details. And that's why we end up more often than not with a very standard model. It makes complete sense. However, the resistance, the difficulty we have in trying to review something that doesn't work, that is not normal, and that needs to change. It's understandable that there is resistance because there are jobs at stake and there is a certain level of comfort, but it's just too difficult today, especially for NGOs who face situations where the specific needs are not being taken into account, having to fight and argue sometimes for years before we see any change. That is abnormal, and we need to start thinking, like there's an ASC review that is ongoing, currently on hold. I think this is one of the things that NGOs should be discussing. Should we have a review that is mandatory, not necessarily like it wouldn't be a yearly thing, but maybe every 2 years, that is propositional, that is capable of actually producing changes. And I think it's necessary. Our contexts change much faster than our coordination systems do. I'm over with this one. Garth, I know you still can't see me, so over.
Thanks, Alfie. Now you're back up. We've got a big picture of you on the screen, looking over at us and looking at us as well. I'm conscious we have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to get my panelists to the option of either a concluding thought or responding to those questions, and then I'll wrap up at the end. So I might. Okay, Ahmed.
I think everything has been said, and more than this, it will not. It will make people not read the report. But apart in short, I think this is an initiative that needs to be supported. Everybody from their desks and wherever they are, it has been a long journey. Coordination has been changing over the years. It has always been moving from point to point. Of course, it was improving. Still, we feel there are challenges. There are areas of improvement. And for that to happen, I think it is the work of everybody to contribute positively and ensure here our objectives are very clear. To avoid duplication, make use of the limited resources that we have, and ensure that everybody is doing the right thing at the right time. For that to happen, I think we need to be thinking hard day and night to ensure that we have a unique way of solving some of these challenges. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And just a final concluding thought from myself then. I think, I mean, coordination is sometimes a thankless task, right? It's when it works well, it's invisible. When it's going badly, it gets the kind of brunt of everything. But I think there is, as we say, some momentum around being propositional, being creative, and again, putting sort of people and access of people to services at the front of coordination again. So yeah, a call to action, I guess. Happy to kind of take this forward with those interested, and sort of we'll continue the conversation over the coming years as well. Alfie, I don't know if you want to conclude with anything on your side.
No, just that you should really read the report, at least the executive summary. It's fairly comprehensive. It outlines a lot of the potential challenges, but a lot of the solutions and way forward. So I hope you will take the time. It's available online starting today. So yeah, I was just checking on this. It's available now. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Alfie. And I also welcome critique and criticism. I think we lack healthy debate in the humanitarian world sometimes. So happy to engage with anyone who's